Welcome to Shadow of the Puppet, a dark psychological thriller podcast where innocence is stitched and silence is sacred. In this story, the victims don't cry. They smile. When the police find girls posed like dolls, mouths sewn shut, eyes frozen in fear, one detective begins to unravel a pattern too disturbing to be coincidence. But what if the killer isn't just a man? What if it's a script, written by someone who has been watching your life from the start? From Norway to Vienna, Krakow to Florence, the theater of eternal brides performs in the shadows. And now, you're about to enter the front row. So turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and remember, dolls don't scream, they obey.
Shadow of the Puppet. Episode 1, The One She Called Monster. The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days. In the early morning gray, as clouds drifted low over the fjords and mist curled around the pine trees like fingers, a janitor at Rosenland Girls' Academy struggled with his umbrella, grumbling at the cold. He paused when he saw something tied to the school's rusted gate. A doll. It wasn't a regular doll. Porcelain. Cracked. Its left eye was missing. The other stared blindly into the storm. Its lips were sewn shut with red thread. Pinned to its chest with a rusted brooch was a torn page of violin sheet music, Sonata in D minor. The janitor didn't know it, but the girl who practiced that very sonata every afternoon wouldn't make it home that evening. Her name was Rhea Wallace. 13. Bright. Brilliant on the violin. Always the first to laugh and the last to leave practice. Her disappearance wasn't loud. It didn't make the news that day. She simply never came home. Her mother thought she was at a friend's. Her school thought she'd gone home early. It wasn't until 36 hours later that the panic set in. And by then, she was already cold. They found her body inside an abandoned fish warehouse by the harbor, near the bones of ships long forgotten by sailors. She was lying on a wooden table, hands arranged in a graceful ballet pose. Her mouth was tightly bound with cello tape. Her violin was shattered beside her like broken bones. And on her chest lay a blackened doll's head, melted at the jaw. Inside her violin case, there was a note written in red ink. She said I looked like a monster. So I made her look perfect. Detective Elias Drevik stood silently beside the table, his jaw clenched, his eyes hard. The hum of the overhead fluorescent light flickered, a soft buzzing in the silence. His colleagues murmured theories, pedophile, psycho, copycat. But Elias didn't hear them. His mind was somewhere else, not in that warehouse, but in another case, 3 years ago. The explosion. The scream. His fiancée's face, blurred in smoke, vanishing into fire. He had failed then. He would not fail now. Back at the Bergen Police Department, Elias stayed late into the night. He pulled out boxes of cold case files, cases no one else remembered. He scanned every image, every autopsy, every broken little body forgotten by the media. And then he found it. Alisund. A 12-year-old girl drowned in a bathtub, filled not with water but puppet stuffing. Gothenburg. A ballerina found with her joints dislocated and reattached like a marionette, strings tied from her wrists to the ceiling. Tromsø. A girl posed in a glass box, lips waxed, hands stitched to a doll's shoulders. All declared unrelated. All quietly closed. But Elias saw it. They were all the same. They were rituals. He circled one word in red across the board. Julian Matheson. Julian was a name from a psychiatric report, one nearly discarded. Born with a facial deformity that made children cry and adults recoil. Institutionalized before age 10. Diagnosed with severe body dysmorphia, obsessive delusional disorder, and worst of all, puppet identity disorder. He didn't want to be loved. He wanted to control love. Any girl who smiled at him, a nurse, a teacher, a stranger, he believed was his. When rejected, he destroyed his dolls. Then began carving new ones. Julian died in a fire in 2015 when his institution burned down. But Elias knew. That body was never confirmed. And monsters don't burn that easily. 3 days later, a small brown package arrived at Elias's desk. No return address. Inside it was a wedding invitation. Handmade. Lace-lined. And a name, Sasha Green. Age 14. She was scheduled to perform a ballet solo in her school's cultural fest that weekend. Beneath the card was a melted puppet head. Its jaw sewn shut. Its forehead carved with the words, "My bride." Also inside was a USB stick. Elias inserted it. The screen flickered to life with footage of Sasha's last performance, a graceful solo on stage, spotlights shining, audience clapping. But in the shadows of the crowd, far back under the red curtains, sat a man. Perfectly still. In a raincoat. His puppet rested on his lap. The puppet had two faces, one smiling, one weeping. Elias rushed to Sasha's home, then to her school. But he was too late. That night, Sasha disappeared. And 12 hours later, he found her. At the ruins of an old puppet theater on the outskirts of Bergen. Inside the cold, burned stage, a spotlight had been turned on. Candles arranged like an altar. A cheap white dress hung over Sasha's lifeless body. Her mouth had been sewn into a bride's smile. Her arms stitched around a doll. On the back wall, in dripping red letters, "She promised to love me." Then she screamed. Elias stood frozen. His knees trembled. His breath faltered. He saw not Sasha, but Claire, his fiancée, her smile, her scream, her silence. Was she the first? Was she, his prototype? Later at the station, Elias opened the last drawer in the evidence locker. Inside was a book, torn, stained, fragile. Julian Matheson's diary. Last page. Last line. "They laughed at me. They called me monster. But dolls don't laugh. They smile forever." At 3:12 a.m., Elias returned to his apartment. He poured himself a drink. Sat on the bed. Then he saw it. On his table. A doll. Not from the evidence locker. This one was new. It wore a red scarf, just like Claire's. In its hand was a piece of paper. "She smiled at me too." His phone buzzed. A message. Unknown number. "You're next, detective." Shadow of the Puppet. Episode 2, The Bride Collector. The night after Sasha's body was found, Bergen slept under the kind of stillness that felt wrong. Too quiet. No dogs barked. No car alarms. Just the sound of sleet tapping glass and the low hum of city lights, like a warning from the dark. Detective Elias Drevik didn't sleep. He didn't try. He sat at his kitchen table, staring at the doll someone had left inside his locked apartment. Its stitched smile was smug. Its button eyes seemed to follow him. The doll wore a red scarf, just like Claire's. Claire, who had died in an explosion no one ever solved. Claire, who had once laughed on this very chair. Claire, who, now he feared, might have been the first. His fingers trembled as he turned the note still clutched in the puppet's hand. "She smiled at me too." By morning, Elias was at the forensics lab. He had the doll dusted, scanned, x-rayed. No DNA. No fingerprints. Not even trace fiber. Whoever the killer was, he was a ghost in skin. But one thing stood out: the doll's joints were handcrafted, carved from Norwegian maple, and painted with a unique blue-tinted lacquer. That paint hadn't been commercially available in over a decade, discontinued and banned because it contained trace arsenic. There was only one known place it had been used. The Crone Puppet Workshop, shut down in 2012 after a fire destroyed most of its stock, and one of its former apprentices went missing. His name? Julian Matheson. Elias drove 3 hours north to the ruins of the Crone workshop. The building stood like a corpse, blackened by fire, windows broken, the inside hollow. But in the basement, there was something else. Someone had been living there. Not recently, but for a while. There were tattered sheets laid out in a corner. Stacks of old bridal magazines. A trunk filled with broken music boxes. And pinned across the crumbling walls, photos of girls. Dozens of them. School photos. Ballet flyers. Newspaper clippings. Each one circled. Labeled. Ria. Sasha. And one more, marked only as next bride. She was a new face. Blonde. Tall. Wearing a fencing suit. The background said Oslo Junior Open. He scanned the blurry trophy name in the background. Lillian Anders, age 15. Elias had to move fast. By nightfall, he was in Oslo, checking school databases. He found Lillian at a fencing academy near the harbor, already being coached for international competition. He warned the school. Got her temporary protection. But something didn't sit right. The killer was careful. Smart. He never went for the obvious next. He always stayed one step ahead. Elias opened the diary again. Julian's final entry. Brides must be chosen with care. Some run. Some scream. But the perfect ones stay silent. It wasn't Lillian. She was the decoy. He rushed back to the trunk from the puppet shop. Checked the other files. The flyers. The articles. Then he saw it. A face he recognized from a charity benefit show poster pinned behind others. A quiet girl. Background dancer. Almost hidden. Isla Nygaard. 12. Shy. No public profiles. Perfect. Elias called every patrol. No response. Then came the message from an anonymous burner. You picked the wrong bride. The church bells ring at 3. He checked his watch, 2:41. He drove like hell. The bells rang at St. Ansgar's church, long abandoned, cold, and empty. When Elias burst through the rotting wooden doors, all he heard was a lullaby. Played on an old record player. The sound scratched. Warped. Like a mother singing through broken teeth. And at the altar, a doll. Taller than the others. Life-sized. A veil covered her head. Elias stepped forward. Heart pounding. He lifted the veil. It wasn't a doll. It was Isla. Her skin was pale. Her chest, barely moving. She was alive, sedated. The stitching had begun on her mouth, but not finished. He untied her. Whispers echoed through the church walls. A creak of floorboards. Then a voice. Soft. Male. Calm. You ruined the ceremony. Elias turned. A figure emerged from the choir shadows. A man in a stitched-up raincoat. Half his face burned and melted, the other covered in porcelain. Julian. His hands held two things. A sewing needle and a puppet. Wearing a miniature police badge. Julian lunged. Elias fired, missed. A fight exploded in the altar aisle. Smashed pews. Blood on broken stained glass. Elias stabbed the puppet into Julian's face, and Julian screamed. He wasn't screaming in pain. He was screaming like the puppet. That's when Elias realized. The puppet wasn't a toy. It was his mask. His shield. His bride. His identity. He destroyed it. Julian collapsed, whispering. I made them smile. When no one else could. Then silence. But Julian wasn't dead. The body vanished from the hospital 3 days later. Only one thing remained on the empty bed. A paper note. Folded like a wedding vow. You broke the ceremony. But I still have one more bride. Claire.